Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. Season 2 content for the War Within expansion has only been live for about 2 weeks from today, which means that there's only been a handful of time for players to really gear out their characters with some of the better items available. And while an overall Mythic Plus meta has not really been shaped up just yet with players pushing some of the highest content, we are at least seeing a popularity of certain classes being springboarded as of this moment, especially with so many players looking to play solo in Season 2 and Pugging being the bees that it always has been for multiple seasons. Certain classes are going to have an easier time getting into groups than others, while other specs are actually going to have a harder time getting into groups as of the moment. And we've actually been able to collect quite a bit of data so far from this season to see which classes are having some of the easiest time finding groups within Mythic Plus right now. And I want to take a look at what classes are looking like the most popular pick for Pugs as of this moment. This doesn't necessarily go over like the entire meta for Mythic Plus, as that'll continue to ebb and flow as more players get gear, we get more comfortable with these dungeons. We'll see probably more patch notes over the next few weeks, but I did want to highlight all the classes that are having the easiest and the hardest time finding groups for Mythic Plus dungeons as of Season 2 content. As always, if you guys want to see more content updates for the War Within expansion, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. But otherwise, let's dive right in. So first of all, let's start with the melee DPS options, and starting off with the most popular pick, which is Retribution Paladin, right now narrowly making it towards the top end, but barely ever so. It is a very popular pick, however, all across all variety of different key levels, and they're just overall looking like a fairly consistent option. Not only do paladins generally have really good utility that really helped propel them forward in Season 1, but it looks like that utility, and to some degree that Season 1 popularity, continues to stick around for Season 2. With ways for them to help mitigate damage with Blessing of Sank, being able to clear movement speed with Freedom, Blessing of Protection to completely immune certain physical effects, and if only they gave Retribution Paladin what right now they have as a PvP talent. Imagine if this thing became a class talent. Oh, Red Pally would be, I think, everywhere, because Red Pally generally is seen as a really good support spec, especially usually you would have either augmentation evokers in groups or Retribution Paladins to provide additional support, and it looks like Retribution Paladins are continuing to be a very solid support choice that also has respectable AoE damage. The only thing they're really missing when it comes to their AoE output is a bit more focus damage, like being able to have fantastic single target with some free splash cleave or something, which a lot of other classes have but Red Pallies don't, which sometimes makes people feel like, oh, it's kind of like pad AoE damage. But if they had a little bit more focus in their damage, I feel like they will be set up for a fantastic season. But even then, in just raw AoE numbers, they're really good for Mythic Plus dungeons in general, with a set amount of cooldowns that do really well in a variety of different situations. The only specs that even come close to Retribution Paladins when it comes to the raw popularity are things like Enhancement Shamans, a popular pick from Season 1, Havoc Demon Hunters, which has gotten better in Season 2, and even Windwalker Monk slowly sneaking up right behind them, which is really good to see, especially when it comes to the spec of the Windwalker Monk. Sliding down to the opposite side of that scale is the least popular picks, and right now, Outlaw Rogue holds that spot. It does have a little bit of an asterisk behind it, and I'll explain it in just a second, but technically, or I guess numerically, there are a lot less Outlaw Rogues than any other melee right now, at least when it comes to Mythic Plus dungeons, with Outlaw actually being behind the black sheep of the Mythic Plus roster, that is Survival Hunters and Feral Druids, which is a bit of an ouch, as those two are generally up towards the bottom, but Outlaw Rogue does end up getting caught behind them, which is unfortunate. Technically, Outlaw Rogues are performing pretty well when it comes to pushing higher end dungeons and performing in some of the more difficult content, at least for the time being. And that will likely change as more players get gear and more classes get to push into some of the really high end content, because some classes really start to open up once you get a lot better gear. But even though Outlaw can technically do really well in some of the more difficult dungeons right now, it doesn't have the overall popularity. Another thing that most players will attribute to the lack of Outlaw players is the difficulty of the spec compared to the other two. The RNG of Roll the Bones and that whole mechanic. So those might be some of the factors that might draw players away from the spec to play maybe an easier version like Assassination, or maybe something that's a little bit more simpler like Subtlety, especially with the cooldown management. But Outlaw is technically the least favored option, at least right now in the current season. Moving on to another role, which is the ranged DPS, we're starting off with the most popular pick, which is the Beast Mastery Hunter. Hunter as a class has gone through a number of changes within its talent tree. Majority of those changes were focused to improve marksmanship and revamp it completely, but Beast Mastery and Survival both saw enough changes in order to give them a little bit more build variety. Plus, with a massive revamp that came down to the pack leader playstyle, which synergizes incredibly well with Beastmaster Hunter and some of the newer talents they have gotten, this allowed Beastmaster to springboard itself throughout the PTR testing, and even after the nerfs, it continued to stay a fairly popular pick into the live realms, and has benefited greatly from both the pack leader rework as well as some of the newer talents in this talent tree. Overall, they have some of the better numbers when it comes to overall value and have been enjoying a pretty popular season from the very get-go. While Beast Mastery utility doesn't really change or become better to some degree, as for this new season, their damage has definitely improved, especially once you get their tier set, so they're having a very strong start early on. On the other classes, when it comes to rage department that are following closely Beast Mastery right now, is things like Fire Mages, Balance Druids, and Destro Warlocks, but as we get more gear into the season, we'll likely see a shift when it comes to the popularity as well as the competitiveness of some of these specs as we head into Season 2 week after week from here on with every single Great Vault and as more players collect some of the better gear for the end content. As for the least popular ranged DPS option, we have the AUG Evoker, which is seeing some of the smallest population numbers imaginable in a very long time. Although to some degree I kind of feel bad because it sounds like I'm kicking them while they're down. But AUG Evoker, at least so far, is having its worst season yet, as they've been hammered by nerfs after nerfs after nerfs, especially towards the tail end of the PTR, with many players expressing their frustration with AUG. It's not that players necessarily hate augmentation as a playstyle. In fact, many players do enjoy this idea of a buff support focused spec that does something different than everybody else. The fact is though, it's so unique that it ends up becoming very basically mandatory in some of the higher end difficulty content. And with the spec reigning as the top pick ever since it got introduced during second season of Dragonflight, I actually introduced during mid-season, kind of taking over that season, becoming a meta pick for Season 2, Season 3, Season 4, and Season 1 of War Within consecutively back to back, which is something that's usually unheard of. Normally we see a variety and changes, a shifting in the meta. We don't just have one spec dominating an entire expansion or multiple seasons in a row, but AUG was a unique case, and they decided to simply take him out of the meta, as all of these nerfs were literally designed just to reduce the overall necessity, but also their popularity, and we're seeing some of the lowest representation of AUG. Does it have some value, especially in some of the hierarchies? It will likely still retain some sort of value. The utility it provides is still there, but it looks like a lot of players are gravitating towards more raw damage rather than the support playstyle option, and these nerfs really do look like they are starting to impact its popularity overall. But we'll see how AUG changes and adjusts as we head into the season. Maybe they'll do some sort of a tuning adjustment to bring him up a little bit, but right now they're starting off very unpopular early on, which is very surprising after we've seen them being a very popular pick for so many seasons in a row. Moving on to another role, we have tanks within Mythic Plus content. At least for the time being, Protection Paladin seems to be the most popular choice. They were a very popular pick within Season 1. Very similar to Retribution Paladin, Prop Pallies bring very similar utility, with Hand of Freedom, Blessing of Protection, and even Spell Warden to help boost their party's survivability against magic damage, which gives protection quite an edge. But this edge was very visible during Season 1, and they've done a number of nerfs and tuning things in order to bring down the popularity and the guarantee the prop will be the best choice heading into Season 2 to offer some more build variety and spec variety for the season, which is good to see. That being said, Protection Paladin right now is still technically very popular, mostly based on the popularity from Season 1, but they're followed very closely by Vengeance Demon Hunter. And when it comes to pushing some of the higher end content, we are seeing Vengeance, but also some of the other tanks also do pretty well. Protected Paladin is definitely by no means behind, but it may just end up potentially not being a top option as we head further into the season. At least it's just where we're starting to trend into that type of a direction, but it doesn't mean its utility isn't valuable heading into this dungeons, and will likely still retain some sort of a respectable position within Season 2 and plus content. As for the least popular choice for tanks, at least for the time being, it does seem like Brewmaster Monk right now holds that spot. Though historically Monk as a class does not have nearly the same popularity and population numbers as some of the other options, so for Brewmaster you're already having a bit of a fighting struggle, and whenever they're not insane, like last time I think they were really good back in BFA for Mythic Plus content in particular, outside of that they usually don't have the strongest representation behind them. But they have been able to, or at least they have been observed, pushing some of the more higher keys pretty early in the season, so potentially things may change. Brewmaster by itself, the only thing that really holds it back compared to some of the other tanks out there is a little bit less self-reliable. Like some of the other tanks can hold their own and keep themselves sustained without necessarily needing a healer in some of the more difficult pulls. Brewmasters do need a little bit of healing, but they do have some decent options for survivability, but not as consistent survivability. Usually in bursts or while a cooldown is active, but not regularly. But their damage kind of helps make up a lot of that difference, so as long as they have a reliable healer to keep them alive, they can output a little bit more damage, competing with some of the other tanks and in some cases above them. So potentially that could maybe make them a little bit stronger as we get more gear, or maybe a single tuning pass which can improve maybe their self-healing or just personal sustainability a little. This could possibly springboard them a little bit higher in the overall meta. Then moving on to the healing role, we have Disc Priest still dominating as, at least for now, the most popular option. There was kind of like a bit of a dueling situation between them and Mistweavers over on the PTR for a good bit of while, and it looks like that still continues on heading through the season, but Disc Priest just has slightly more numbers at least early on, but this may change as we head into the season. Disc Priest definitely secured itself a fairly strong spot from Season 1, and that type of reliable competitiveness does continue on into Season 2. While Disc Priest does not have too much in terms of utility, they have fantastic throughput with quite a bit of additional damage, though at a cost of things like mobility as well as utility. Like they're the only healer spec that doesn't have an interrupt. So depending as you push into some of the higher end dungeons, if you need additional utility or you can't really supplement it with other classes, unless there's a comp designed for Disc Priest specifically, they could be in a weird spot, but at least right now early on, they're starting off pretty well. They have fantastic damage reduction skills with pain suppression, as well as the dome that they could put down on everybody around them. So for them to be able to dampen some of the hardest hitting abilities out there, they definitely have that in spades. And overall, they have the numbers, but we'll see if that utility, or sometimes the lack thereof, may potentially push them back in one way or another as we start really pushing some of the higher end game keys of the Season 2. Though sadly, this does leave us with the final portion of the video, which is the least popular healer, and I'm really painful to say this, but it is Preservation Evoker, which is so unfortunate because it has got to be one of my favorite healing playstyles. I love the whole combo healing setups that you could do with Echo and some of the other abilities, how you can get life binds on multiple targets and then heal yourself to heal everybody around you. There's a lot of cool synergies to play around with as Preservation, but numerically though, they just don't have that many players playing them. And this will be the best time to start playing Preservation too. That and Devastation with Og taking a bit of a backseat, this gives the Evoker specs, the healer and the DPS ones, a little bit some room to fly and grow. That being said though, because the spec is so combo heavy, it is also very setup heavy, and that means you'd have to spend a little bit more effort to output all of your healing, where other classes can do just about the same healing you can, minus all that setup. Plus with the Evokers having a little bit of this range requirement to it, being shorter range than some of the other classes, but also position requirements for some of your abilities, it does complicate things in certain dungeon environments, especially when allies are all spread apart. For Preservation, it's a lot better to have a comp base where allies are a little bit closer together and play around the strengths of the Evoker to make them function. But in Pug content, how can you expect random players to be in exact positions where you need them to be? And because of that Pug unfriendliness with the spec, it does reduce some of the popularity, at least for now, within Season 2. But as always, I do want to thank all of you guys so much for watching, and hope you guys did enjoy this quick little Mythic Plus overview. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give this video a like. I would very much appreciate it, and we'll like to see more class tuning over these next few weeks for Season 2 content, so be sure to join our Discord to discuss all of the newest changes as soon as they arrive or get announced for the patch 11.1. Also, let me know all your thoughts in the comments down below, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.